Hi everyone, my name is Renee and my teaching presentation is going to be on using the for loop in P.H.P. This class is CIT 336 Section 04 for the fall semester of 2016. So when would you use a for loop? You use a for loop to repeat a series of instructions. You also use a for loop to circulate it through a list of items. And you use a for loop when you know the amount of times that is needed to run through a loop in a script. The for loop is used in many languages such as HTML, MySQL, PHP, and CSS. But the difference in using the for loop in PHP is that if you take a look here, you would notice that the value has a $sign. So that is one big difference within using a for loop in PHP. Now let's talk about the for loop structure. The for loop has a for command word. It has 3 parameters: the initial counter, the test counter, and the increment counter. After your parameters, you will place your opening and closing curly brackets. And within that curly brackets, you will place your execution code. And this is an example of how your basic PHP for loop would look. So the for statement is used to create the for loop. Within your parameters, you have your initialization counter, which initializes the loop counter or starts the loop counter. So you start with your value and you set your value to equal something. Most statements are set to 0 or 1, but this is not always the case. The value can change according to what you are trying to accomplish in your code. The value can also be a string. It does not have to be a number. Then you have your test counter. And what this does is it evaluates the value or the condition in each loop. If the condition is true, then the loop continues. And if the condition reads false, then the loop ends. Your third counter is your increment or decrement counter. So in order to move to the next loop within your condition, you will have to either increase it or decrease it. And just by setting it to plus plus or negative negative increases or decreases it by the number or the value of 1. But you do not have to use the value of 1. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So the value here can change. And I will show you how that works later on. Also take note that each counter is separated by semicolons. Within most execution statements in PHP, you usually echo out a result or string. Here's our first example of a PHP. There are a couple of ways to write your PHP when using HTML. So in this example, our PHP is written first, and then our HTML is written afterwards. Within our loop, our for loop, we are starting a counter at the value of 0 or number 0. And if that value is less than or equal to 10, then we are going to increase the counter. And then for our part of our execution statement, we are going to echo out the actual string the number is. And you will see that on the right side of your screen. And then when we have reached the end of our value or loop, the loop will break. And so we started at zero, and we just increased by 1 because we just did a plus plus, and we went all the way to 10 because this evaluates to be true because it's less than or equal to 10. Our next example shows how to implement PHP while nesting it within your HTML. Within this example, we have the title Leap Years that is centered. You see that to the right side of your screen. Our for loop is going to do something different. So we have a different value here. Our for loop has a leap value, but that leap value is given a numeric, is equal to a numeric value. And so the counter is going to start at the year of 2004. And if that leap value is less than the year of 20,050, then our third counter is going, or our increment counter is going to leap. So it's going to be a leap. We know it's going to equal to a leap, but that leap is going to be by 4 years. And then our string is going to echo out the string leap. So here's the leap string from the echo, and then here's the leap years as the title for HTML, and this is your PHP, and it's starting the counter at the year 2004 and leaping by 4 years all the way through the loop until it becomes false, and that false will become after the year of 20,048, ending just before our value of the year 20,050. Our next example is a for loop using a continue statement. Now, a continue statement is used in a for loop and helps control a loop. Here, when the number to be displayed is in multiples of 4, the continue statement would skip the remainder of the loop and start the loop again after the counter is incremented. As a result, only the numbers that are not multiple of 4s are going to be displayed in this loop. So we're starting at the initialization at the number of 25. If that number is less than or equal to 25, then we're going to decrease or decrement the loop. And our condition is if that number is in multiples of 4, then it is not equal to the numbers that we are seeking. And so our string is going to echo out the number of values, and then when it gets to the end of the loop, it's going to stop. So there's the 25, the initialization counter, and it goes through the loop, skipping 24 because it's a multiple of 4, skipping 20, skipping 16, skipping 12, skipping 8, and skipping 4. all the way down to 0. So again, a continue statement help in a current iteration of a loop, but continues with the next loop. And that is how we would use a continue statement within a for loop. Our last example is a for loop using a break statement. Now, what a break statement does is it ends a loop. Here in our example, it determines whether the value of a number is even. If the value of that number is odd, or is the odd variable, then we're going to set it to false as the break statement to be implemented. So prior to our for loop, we had to set some values. So we wanted our number to equal an even number, and if it's an even number, then it's going to equal true. So here's our for statement, and we have the value of num or number, which is going to equal 1 because that's the beginning of our loop that it's going to count at. And if that number is less than or equal to 25, then that number is going to increment or increase. However, if that number is odd, then it's going to be false, which is going to cause the break in the loop. And the result of that number is going to be is or is not, meaning is true or is not true. And we're going to echo out the number, and the result is going to be even is. So there is our even is, the string, and there are our numbers, counting all the even numbers all the way up to the value of just before 25, because 25 is odd, leaving out all of the odd numbers. So here are my references. I used the Code Academy, and I also used W3 Schools. And I got some of my examples from our very own manual, the Maroc P.H.P. second edition. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to post them on the discussion board. And thank you for your time.